Well, welcome everybody. Glad that you could be here, and especially big welcome to Hayley, Twyman, Brack, who is here to talk to you all about licensure. Hayley is a graduate of the UCO Counseling Psychology program in 2017.
Yes, 5 years ago.
So 5 years. So she actually graduated when she was 14 years old.
14 and a half.
From our program, so not really. It was 16, so it's fine. But Hayley currently works at Edmond Counseling and Professional Development, where she is both a practicing therapist who sees kind of a full load of folks, as well as being a major part of their education initiatives through the Counseling Institute. And so last week, you all met Micah Perkins, who's Hayley's boss, actually. And so they put on tons of great trainings every year, live as well as recorded webinars. And they do a great job with that. So she's come the last few years to talk to our about to graduates about the licensure process and kind of what that looks like. And has even developed a little short ebook about that, and I'll send that out as well. Basically, what I'm going to do is just kind of turn things over to Hayley and stay here in the background unless I'm needed. So thank you, Hayley.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lack. And I do have to say, like, most of our trainings are so good because Dr. Lack presents at them. He's done, I think, 5 or 6 in the last year, and he has a couple more coming up. So if you have questions or want to come see Lack speak more, our place is the place to be. But thank you, Dr. Lack, for the warm and wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me today. Do you guys have the ability to like raise your hand on Zoom? Yeah, okay. Could I just have a hand? How many of you guys are LPCs or LPC track candidate and LPC track folks? All right, quite a few. Now, what about the LMFT folks? How many of you guys are LMFT? All right. Cool beans. So in today's training, so I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm an LPC. That's the track that I went through. I've done this training a few times for the LPC folks, and I've adapted it for the LMFTs as well. If there are some inaccuracies, if you guys have, from what I understand, the tracks are very similar, just the licensure requirements are a little bit different. But at any time you LMFTs or LPC track folks, if you guys see any errors, feel free to call me out on that. As we go on to, if you all have questions, feel free to type it in the chat. Either I can unmute you and you can talk, or if you guys have anything that you'd like me to clarify on, let me know. But like Dr. Lack said, I'm going to share my handy dandy PowerPoint here. All right, we're going to share just the PowerPoint. And go. There we go. Can I get a thumbs up if we can see everything okay? Cool beans. All right, so today I'm going to talk about the licensing process. So again, I'm Hayley Twyman Brack. I graduated from UCO in 2017, and I'm the education specialist at Edmond Counseling and Professional Development. You guys talked to my boss, Micah, last week. It's going to be hard to follow him. I know he's a great presenter. But today, like Dr. Lack said, we're going to talk about the application process and the candidacy process and the licensure process. Dr. Lack is going to be sending out my slides. You guys will have those. I've also, I know he can send out our ebook. We did an ebook, sorry, LMFT candidates, but it's an ebook for LPC candidates on pursuing licensure. And you'll find all the hyperlinks to all of the required materials that you need for the candidacy process there. But you can also find those again in these slides today. So kind of what we're going to go over, we're going to talk about supervision, the application process, the tests you need to take, what we need to think about whenever we are looking for a job, what candidacy actually looks like, how to prevent burnout as a candidate, because it can happen. I have known folks who've gotten burnt out before they've even gotten their license. So we want to prevent that, because you guys probably paid a lot for this degree you're getting. I know I did. So and then last, we're going to talk about what we need to do whenever we are ready to get our actual license. So let's talk about supervision first. So whenever you are a candidate, the first thing, or whenever you graduate, one of the first things you will need to do is find you a supervisor. You need a supervisor that is approved to supervise you before you begin your supervision or candidacy process. I'm going to be using the term supervision and candidacy both to talk about the candidacy process. And so supervisors, you can find a list of supervisors on the board's website, and I have a link there. You also might want to take referrals from a friend. So whenever you are starting to look for a supervisor to supervise you during candidacy, call a lot of people. You might not get some calls back. Sometimes the board's website is not up to date on contact information. But some things to keep in mind when you're looking for a supervisor is that you are actually interviewing them. Though you are working under this person's license for the next 2 to 5 years, and though they're going to give you treatment directions, they're going to give you homework assignment, they're going to basically be helping to refine your clinical skills. At the end of the day, you are paying them to be your supervisor. So whenever you go in and you interview them, they might be interviewing you to make sure that, hey, do I want to take this person on under my license? You're a UCO kid, so they're going to want to take you on under their license because you guys are well trained. But make sure that you know that you are interviewing them too. So things to look out for. What is their theoretical orientation? Because as a likely evidence-based clinician that you are, you're probably not going to want someone who is psychodynamic in theory. You're probably not going to want someone who practices non-evidence-based methods. And so whenever you're looking for a supervisor, make sure it is somebody who is within your theoretical orientation and someone that you maybe want to be trained as. So for example, one of my best friends in the world, Amelia Brewer, she specializes in serving the LGBTQIA+ population. So her candidates, those that she takes on, they also have the interest. She trains them in evidence-based practices and best practices and referrals. So whenever you're looking for a supervisor, think, who do I want to learn from over the next 2 to 5 years? You can also change your supervisor anytime. Just because you sign that paper and says that you're going to be supervising me. It's a simple board form change. So if you get 6 months into candidacy and you figure out, oh, this person's not really a good fit, or I feel like I could learn more from this other person, you can change your supervisor anytime, and you can also have more than one supervisor. It's always recommended to have a backup. So you might have your primary supervisor, but then you also might have a backup supervisor. So backup supervisor is who you're going to go to whenever your primary supervisor is unavailable. Whenever I was a candidate, my supervisor, Holly, went out of the country. She was in Poland. She was not accessible for a few weeks, so I had to have a backup. That way I could still see clients. Any questions so far on supervision? Anything like that? No? All right. So your on-site supervisor is going to be different than your primary supervisor. Your primary supervisor, the person you are working with under their license for the next 2 to 5 years, they have to be a supervisor for your specific license type. So if you are on the LPC track, you're an LPC candidate, you have to have a licensed LPC supervisor. If you're an LMFT, you have to have a licensed LMFT. The on-site supervisor is very different. There's someone who is on site at your practice who you can consult with in case of an emergency. And this person just has to be a licensed provider. So they can be a physician, they can be a psychiatrist, they can be an LMFT, LPC, LADC. As long as they have a license and are on your site, they can be your point of contact there. So any questions on the differences between a supervisor and an on-site supervisor? No? All right. I don't see any questions popping up, so I'm going to move right along. So let's talk about application process. Have you guys talked about the application process much? Yeah, a little bit. All right. So this is all the fun stuff you have to do. After you find your supervisor, what you need to do is apply to candidacy. So the first things you're going to want to do are pass the O'Leary or the LMFTs, I think it's almost, that's what I'm going to call it. It's basically the ethics exams for the LPC track and the LMFT track. Then you're going to want to obtain official graduate school transcripts. Those will be available about 2 weeks after you graduate. And we'll kind of talk more about this as the presentation goes on. You're going to have to submit 2 OSBI background check forms with 2 sets of fingerprints. You have to secure a W-2 employment, find your supervisor, complete the application form, and then pass your national boards. So let's look at these steps in a little more detail. So with the application, you're going to find it on the application portal. Back in my day, we had to actually print this out on paper, fill it out, take it to the board, have the board make copies of it for us. So that way they could file the original copies and we had a copy just in case the board lost anything, we had a record that we actually gave it to them. Now you guys just have to go on the application portal and make an account with your email address. So you'll find the application portal here. What you'll want to do is make an account with the Board of Behavioral Health, and you should use your personal email, not your student email. It is a pain in the butt to change your email address with the Board of Behavioral Health. So I highly recommend using an email address that you're going to keep well beyond graduation. The initial application is very straightforward. You'll put your counseling place of employment if possible. You'll put your supervision agreement, and it's going to ask you for something like a general proposed professional practice description. Literally, all I put for that is I plan to engage in individual and group psychotherapy with adults, adolescents, and children in an agency setting. That's all I told the board I planned on doing with my license, and I got it. So not too difficult. You're also going to have to fill out what's called a lawful affidavit. Basically, what that is are you legally able to work in the United States? For most of us, that's yes. For my friend, for my classmate and friend, Jen Win, she was from Malaysia. And so she was actually a citizen of Malaysia, could not legally work in the United States after graduate school. And so she had to have her first place of employment sponsor her to be able to work here. So if that is the case, the board will have forms for you to fill out for your place of employment to sponsor you. So that way you can legally work here. For others, that might be, there's different kinds of sponsorships too. You don't necessarily have to have a place of employment, but if for some reason you are not able to legally work in the United States, go to the board, ask them what requirements you need, but at the end of the day, usually it's your place of employment that will allow you to work here in the United States. You're also going to want your internship and practicum form. So the hours that you're collecting now in practicum, you're going to want to keep those handy dandy. Likely your practicum supervisor will be signing off on those hours. I highly recommend, even though you you complete your practicum, you graduate, I highly recommend keeping at least an electronic copy of these hours. Because let's say a couple of years down the road, you want to move states, or maybe you want to complete your license in another state. Some licensing boards may require you to turn in your practicum hours long after you've graduated. And so it's always a good idea to just keep those handy. I have mine saved still from, I was a Deer Creek kid whenever I was in practicum. I still have my hours saved on my computer, but keep a copy of those. That way, if you ever need to turn them back into the board or you're applying for licensure in another state, you have those as backup. Again, you're also going to need some transcripts. Generally, these are available from UCO a couple of weeks after graduation, but go ahead and get I think they allow 5 copies. So go ahead and get a few copies because some of your places of employment will require transcripts. And also, if you plan on going on to a PhD or pursuing further education in another area, you might still need those. And it's better just to get a whole bunch of copies at once. So you don't have to go back to UCO again and again and again and again. You also get to pay a fee, which is exciting. In order to apply for candidacy, it is a $145 fee made payable to the LPC revolving fund or the LMFT revolving fund. It is highly recommended. So at the time that you guys are applying for candidacy, you might be able to pay for this online through the application portal. If so, then you'll get an electronic receipt as always. But if that's not set up yet, I highly recommend paying for this with a cashier's check or a money order. The board is very busy. The board is very overwhelmed. The board is understaffed and underfunded. Sometimes they lose things. I don't want it to be your check. So if you do have to pay with a check, I highly recommend getting a cashier's check or a money order. That way you can track it, you can cancel it, you can get a new one issued if for some reason that check goes missing. And now for your background check. So in order to apply for candidacy, you will need a background check. You'll have to get 2 copies of your fingerprints. So most law enforcement agencies will do this. So I got mine at the Edmond Police Department. It was $10 for 2 sets of fingerprints. And so most law enforcement agencies will take cash or checks for this. But I've heard Edmond Police Department was great. I've also heard that the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Departments, their offices have been really helpful, but you will need 2 copies of those because you have to get a background check. make sure you bring your fingerprints to the OSBI off of 63rd and Broadway Extension. The application for the background check is available there. What you'll want to do as well is ask for a copy to be mailed to you. Some jobs require background checks. And so with background checks, they can take 2 to 6 weeks to come in. And so let's say that I've already got my background check sent to the board, but then my new employer needs a background check. Then I don't want to have to wait 2 to 6 weeks for the OSBI to get back to them. I also don't want to have to pay for another background check. And so go ahead and have a free one mailed to you. That way you can have it on hand. I think my year, I had to get 3 background checks because one, I didn't have one mailed to me, which was a mistake. My next employment office needed one, and then I had to have another one for another license I was pursuing at the time. So I'm sure the OSBI had a lot of theories about me and why I was ordering so many background checks. So make sure you get copies there. All right, do we have any questions so far? I feel like I've just kind of blown through everything. I'm gonna exit out to see if I can see any questions, comments, concerns. Nope. All right. Let's go back. Oh man. Educated and motivated. Let's talk about what kinds of tests we have to take and pass. So the O'Leary and the, again, I don't know how to pronounce this, LMFTE. These are the ethics exams. These must be taken before you submit your application to candidacy. These tests for LPCs and LMFTs, what you want to do is study the State Board of Behavioral Health Enabling Statute. So it's basically a probably about 15-page document on what the Board of Behavioral Health does, you know, how they pass laws, how they approve licenses, what our fees are. And you're also going to want to study the acts and rules for your specific license. So LPCs have one, LMFTs have one, so on and so forth. The test is approximately an hour long. It probably won't take you that long. I don't know of anyone who hasn't passed it their first time either. So highly recommend just reading through the enabling statute a couple times, be familiar with your acts and your rules. So once you go contact Francis Tuttle, you schedule your exam, you take your exam, they will send a copy of your exam to the Board of Behavioral Health. But you can also get a copy yourself. And I recommend getting a copy yourself, again, in case the board loses something, you don't have to take that test again. So for LPCs, we also have to take the National Counselor exam. So back in my day, we could take this anytime during candidacy. Now LPC candidates have to take this test and pass it before they can start candidacy. So first, what you're going to do is you're going to submit that electronic application to the board for candidacy. You're going to wait for the board to approve you to sit for the NCE. What they're going to do is they're going to send you an email after it'll take about 6 weeks for them to go through your application. They'll send you an email saying, hey, you're ready to sit for the National Counselor exam. Whenever you have that letter of approval, you'll register at the NBCC website. And then once you register there, you'll be able to register about a month or 2 in advance. The test is $275, which is a lot of money, and it's about 4 hours long. But probably the best resource out there is the Encyclopedia of Counseling by Howard Rosenthal. I know Dr. Lack used to have like a PDF of the book. And so I'm sure that's available to you guys. There's also an app that has a lot of study guides, study questions. A friend of mine also used the app. I think they had audio versions as well. So if you're someone who learns best by audio, then when you're driving to grad school or driving to class or driving to practicum, play that Howard Rosenthal audiobook, and that will be helpful. Now, as for the examination of marital and family therapy, again, first you're going to submit your application for candidacy. You'll also wait to receive that email from the board that you can take your test. And you are going to register on the AMFTRB website. And so this test is a lot more expensive. It is $365 and 180 questions. However, the Association of Marital and Family Therapy Regulatory Boards already has a handy dandy practice exam. And so that practice exam, it is on the same website where you register for the exam. But from what I saw online, that is one of the best resources for studying. Does anyone in the LMFT track have any other recommendations or resources they found? Have you guys been looking at studying or kind of blocking it out until graduation? None yet?
I have personally been using the app that you mentioned. I think it might be the same one, but that's been really helpful with giving me notifications when to study and whatnot. So that's been nice that it's on my device and it's easily accessible.
Awesome. The Rosenthal Purple app. The little in the Howard Rosenthal National Counselor Exam app, or is it a different one? I think that one.
Sorry, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought it was really handy too. All right. So those are your exams. Do you guys have any questions on the exams? Why do they make us do this or anything like that? No. Now, something to keep in mind too is with the application process, our application process might be different than other states. So if you plan on moving to another state before starting candidacy, then highly recommend contacting their boards to get information on what's necessary. A lot of states in the South and the West take the NCE as their National Counselor Exam for LPCs. Other states have different boards you have to take. So before you study for the NCE, if you are moving to another state, contact that board, figure out what tests you need to know about before you waste all that time studying for the NCE. So let's talk about employment now. So back in my day, again, candidates used to be able to be contract employees, which meant that we were 1099 employees. We technically weren't employed by an agency. We were working for ourselves with our own business. Looking back, I don't think that was a great idea because that gave us a lot of freedom right out of candidacy, basically, or right out of graduation. You're graduating, you start your own business as a therapist without even getting your license yet. So 2 or 3 years ago, they changed to where candidates have to be W-2 employees, which means salary employees. And so W-2, what that means is the difference between W-2 and 1099 is when you're a W-2 employee, you are legally employed by that business. They have to assume liability for you. More than likely, their malpractice insurance will cover you as well. You can be a W-2 employee and be salary or hourly. So salary would be like, you get a set amount of money every year, no matter how much you work. Hourly, you get a set amount of money for however many client hours you clock, things like that. But we can no longer, as candidates, be 1099 or contract employees. And that is a still from Judas Priest's Don't Break the Law music video, if you're wondering why that's there. Don't break the law, be a W-2 employee, don't go the contract route until you're fully licensed. Feel free to type in the chat. Do you guys have any questions on the difference between a W-2 employee or a 1099, a contract versus salaried? Or salary versus contract, I got that backwards. All right. So let's talk about what candidacy actually looks like. So let's say you have passed your NCE or you've passed your marriage and family therapy exam. You have got that magical email from the Board of Behavioral Health saying, congratulations, you're approved for candidacy. Your candidacy starts as of today. Now, whether you start working that day or you start working in 2 months, you must start logging your hours at that day. Now, in the case of my example, I was approved in June, but I didn't start working as a candidate until September. I basically had to turn in 8 or 9 weeks of just 0 hours because I didn't work. But the Board of Behavioral Health starts counting your hours immediately upon you receiving that email. Candidates, we must log, as LPCs at least, we must log direct hours, indirect hours, and supervision hours, and I'll kind of get into what those mean here in a little bit. But when it comes to logging your hours, so when you first get that email, make sure to let your supervisor know that you're approved so they know when technically you'll be working under their license. Also ask them about how they would like you to log your hours. So LPCs, we must have at least 20 hours per week to count towards candidacy. Let's kind of get into that. So first of all, what can be logged? So direct client contact hours means you are sitting directly face-to-face with the client. For LPCs, we have to log that as a ratio. For LMFTs, I believe that's the only hours you have to log is how many direct face-to-face client contact hours do I have. Indirect hours, those are your treatment planning. That is your education. That is your reading. That is your basically everything that you have to do as a counselor that's not counseling. So whenever you're writing notes, whenever you are attending continuing education, that's your indirect hours. What you want to do is before you start to log your hours, one, talk to your supervisor about what they will count. Some supervisors are a lot more strict on what hours they will allow to count under their license. So even though the Board of Behavioral Health might say these hours are okay to log, your supervisor might not. So you might check with them on how they would like you to log your hours, what kinds of hours they would like you to log. You also want to refer to the Professional Counselor Licensing Act, or for the LMFTs, your counseling or your act as well, because hours can be negated by the board. There was an instance a couple of years ago where somebody was basically clocked a bunch of indirect hours doing therapy animal training. And so they clocked, I don't know, like 150, 200 hours doing therapy animal training. And the board said that does not count. And so that person lost that 200 hours that they clocked for animal therapy training, because it was not in the Professional Counselor Licensing Act as an approved activity for indirect hours. So again, direct hours, direct client contact, I am sitting with the client face to face or Zoom to Zoom or whatever you're using. Indirect hours is everything else that it takes to be a counselor. Any questions on the difference between those 2 hours? No? All right. So for LPC candidates, we must log at least 3,000 hours during candidacy. If you're working full-time, that comes out to about 2 years. If you're Amelia Brewer, that's like an hour or a year and a half. My friend who I was talking about earlier, she is a hard worker. She got her license done in a year and a half. I am mesmerized, because it took me the whole 2 years of working 40 hours a week. Now, at least 1/3 of those hours must be direct client contact. I know this math doesn't make sense, saying at least 1,050 hours must be direct client contact, because the board's rules both say 1/3 of the hours must be direct client contact, AKA 1,050, and that does not equal 1/3 of 3,000, but that's what the board says. At least 1,050 of your hours must be direct client contact, and at least 1/3 of those hours must be direct client contact. For LMFT candidates, yours are a little different. You have to work at least 2 full years before you get your license. So let's say that you begin candidacy in September. Even if you reach your hours, even if you reach your 1,000 hours in 18 months, you have to work that full 2 years before you can apply for licensure. So for LMFT candidates, it's a little different as well. So again, LMFT candidates, you're only going to be clocking the direct hours. You don't have to worry about the indirect hours, from what I understand. And at least 250 of those direct hours have to be with 2 or more members of a family or in a relational system, whether that's a family, whether it's a couple, whether that's friends, whatever you're doing. So it has to be 1,000 hours direct client contact with at least 250 of those hours with 2 or more relational system members. LPC candidates, it's not logged that way. You do have to log if you are seeing family versus individual, so on and so forth. But the board doesn't care how many hours of those are family, how many hours of those are individual. Do you guys have any questions on that so far? No?
I'm sorry, I had a question.
Yeah.
So whenever, for LMFTs, whenever you say they must work a full 2 years, like in your case, for example, you said you didn't start working until September. Would that be from whenever you're approved for your candidacy and ready to start working, or when you actually start working 2 years?
So from what I understand, it's whenever you start doing supervision. So if you're starting to see clients, let's say you get approved for candidacy in August, you don't start seeing clients until September, then that's whenever that 2 years would start for you, from what I understand.
From September?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. You have to
Alrighty.
work. Yeah.
Mhm.
Good question. Any other questions, my friends? All right. So let's look at the LPC track when it comes to ratios. So again, regardless of how many hours are clocked in candidacy, at least 1/3 must be direct client contact. At first, this ratio may be off your first maybe 6 months or so. Maybe you're building up a caseload, or maybe you're doing some, like, depending on the organization you're with, you're not allowed to see clients for the first 4 to 6 weeks while you're doing trainings and things like that. That is okay. If for the first 6 months or so, maybe it's like a quarter or a fifth of your hours are direct client contact, that's okay, as long as by the end of candidacy, your cumulative hours, at least 1/3 are direct client contact. We have kind of a wonky system for our supervision as well. Basically, we must have 2.25 minutes of supervision for every hour clocked in the week while in candidacy. If you're working a full 40-hour work week, that's 90 minutes of supervision. If you're working more than a 40-hour work week, make sure you are adding on supervision time. So if you, which I do not recommend doing this, but if you are working a 60-hour work week, then technically you would need mental math 135 minutes of supervision. So if you're working a 20-hour work week, that comes out to 45 minutes of supervision. So make sure that, one, you are working at least 20 hours, because I had a friend who was very close to the end of her candidacy. She turned in her hours, and 1 week she only got 17 hours, and the board did not count that. The board will not count your hours towards licensure if you had not worked at least 20 hours in a week. Now, that doesn't mean like direct client contact hours. That means like hours in general. So that's your indirect plus your direct hours. Also, make sure that if you're working that 40-hour work week, you're going to receive the full 90 minutes of supervision. I had another friend who she was working part-time for a while, so she's only working 20 hours a week. She got 45 minutes a week, but then her last like 3 months of candidacy, she just wanted to get it done. She just wanted to get it done, push through. I'll take on lots of extra clients. I've got stuff to do. I want to get this license. So she revved up her caseload, was working 40, 45 hours a week, but she forgot to ask her supervisor to increase her supervision. And so because even though she worked 40 hours a week, because she only received 45 minutes of supervision every week, the board only counted 20 hours per week towards licensure. Any questions on that wonky math that we got to do? You guys just thought you were done with math. No.
So you had said that we have to have a minimum of 20 hours each week. What about the first, like after you're approved, but you're not actually able to work yet? How do you do the 20 hours and maintain that minimum?
Yeah, so at first, if you can't work, like it's okay to turn in 0 hours. Like I was talking earlier, I wasn't able to start working until September, even though I was approved in June. But if you're wanting hours to count, you need to clock at least 20. And so let's say that you're doing more of the what is it called? Hourly rate, where you're getting paid by client. You can ask your supervisor, hey, I want to go ahead and start clocking hours. What are some things I can do? And so let's say that you're working for the DBT Institute. You got a job with the DBT Institute. You don't have a caseload yet, but you want to get those hours. Maybe they'll give you something like, okay, take these DBT trainings for the next week to start to get your hours. Or, I'd like you to take these trainings on note writing to get your hours. So ask your supervisor what you can do to make up those hours. For my supervisor, Holly, what she had me do is she gave me a lot of books on working with kids and like treating anxiety in kids and trauma in kids, because in my job that I was going into, it was primarily a kid-focused job, my very first counseling job. And so she gave me a lot of reading material that was specific for my clients. Because the thing is, when it comes to this indirect hours, you can't just like read anything. You can't just like go to any training for it to count. You have to keep in mind that anything that you're doing, there's a potential, and not say this is going to happen, not to scare anyone, but you have to kind of go in it with the mindset of how would I justify this to the board? And so if you're clocking those indirect hours and you want to, count reading that manual, you want to ask, well, how would I justify this to the board? Okay, well, I'm reading this manual to clock for indirect hours because I have clients that meet criteria for this population, or I'll be using this with these kinds of clients. So that's just something to keep in mind, is whenever you are trying to clock those indirect hours, make sure you have a purpose behind it and make sure your supervisor is okay with signing off on it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're working under their license. And so they kind of get to choose what counts and what doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? No. All right. So let's look at the LMFT track. So you guys are a little bit different. You guys must clock. The ratios outlined in your acts and regulations say you guys must clock at least 6.25 hours for every 42 hours of direct client contact. So that equates to a little more than an hour and a half each week. And so for LMFTs too, no matter how many hours you actually clock, a max of 42 hours of direct client contact can be counted in a 4-week period. So that's what kind of keeps you guys in supervision for so long as well, is that no matter if you see 60 or 40 hours of direct client contact, the max you can only get is 42 direct hours that count for you. Now, from what the acts and regulations say, you and your supervisor can make an appeal to the board to allow more client contact hours to count. From what I could tell, it doesn't look like that happens very often. It's probably in very rare cases that a clinician is able to clock more than that. But that is something to keep in mind, that you guys are kind of maxed out on how many client contact hours you can take. Questions on that, my LMFT friends? All right. So let's talk about the hours log. So your hours log is due every 6 months. And again, the hours log starts the day you're approved for candidacy, not the day you start candidacy. You want to keep, for LPCs, keep a record of direct, indirect, and supervision hours. For LMFTs, it's just going to be your direct and supervision hours. For your hours log, you're also going to have to write down 2 dates where your supervisor reviewed your sessions. So your supervisor can either request to view a live session, or they can listen to a recording. What Holly had me do is, with the client's written permission, I recorded a couple of sessions every 6 months. And your supervisor can request more of you. I know a supervisor who, for one candidate I knew, they required their supervisee send them a recording every month. So that way they can listen to more of their trainings, get more information. And so your supervisor can ask for more, but you have to at least do 2 every month. You have to write down which date your supervisor and on-site supervisor also consulted. So if your on-site supervisor is different than your licensing supervisor, they have to consult at least once in that 6-month period. And it is your responsibility to make sure they consult. Don't put it on your supervisors. They got stuff to do. They're going to forget to contact your supervisor. And so make sure that you are on both of them to connect, make the appointment for them if you have to. Just make sure that they touch base within that 6-month period. And so you can put it on your supervision log that they talked on this date to make sure that I'm doing a good job. On this hours log, you're also going to have an evaluation of supervised experience. So that is going to be your supervisor evaluating you on all of these different clinical skills, as well as signing off on your hours. There's also space for you to sign off on that says that my supervisor went over this with me. I'm aware of my expectations, and this is how many hours I've clocked. And this must be turned in within 30 days of your 6-month period. So let's say you are licensed, you are approved for candidacy in September, then you have to record those hours until the end of February. You have until the end of March to turn those hours in. If it's not turned in within 30 days of that 6-month period, they will not count those hours. I had a friend who lost about 1,000 hours that way because he didn't turn in his paperwork in time. So make sure that you turn those in within 30 days of the 6-month period. It's also important to stay up to date with board rules and regulations. I've talked about a lot of changes that have happened since my time as a candidate and now. Things change constantly with the Board of Behavioral Health. They meet every other month, but things are subject to change in between there. For example, in the middle of my candidacy is whenever they put the 30-day rule in. It used to be you can just turn in all your supervision hours at the end of your candidacy and be fine. You didn't have to turn in everything every 6 months. But now how it is again, it's within 30 days you have to turn that in. Now the board's not going to send you an email saying, hey, by the way, the rules and laws have changed. You guys stay up to date with this. They will not alert you. It is your job to visit the Board of Behavioral Health's website regularly. You can also review the agenda items on board meetings. That's public knowledge. It's also on the Board of Behavioral Health's website. You can attend board meetings yourself if you wanted to. Also, shameless plug, one of us, either Micah or me, will be going to, it's Micah so far, I haven't had to go yet, but Micah goes to the board meetings, and we usually do a write-up of the synopsis of all the board meetings too. So check out Oklahoma Counseling Institute. You can join as a membership as a grad student, and anytime there's any kind of board updates, we write an article about it, we send it out to folks. So if you want to stay up to date, you can join our site, or you can check out the Board of Behavioral Health website. Just make sure you're staying up with the board's rules and regulations and changes, because they will not inform you. You'll have to inform yourself. Let's talk about burnout. So like I said, it is possible to burn out as a candidate before you even get your license. Burnout's caused by excessive stress, over demanding jobs, and lack of support from supervisors. So as a candidate, You might be working with very difficult population, or you might be working a job that is a lot of responsibility, a lot of client hours with very little pay. Candidates aren't always paid the best and are always given the prime easy cases. You're going to be given a lot of difficult cases. And also, you're going into full-time counseling work. That's a big shift. That's a lot of emotional stress. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of learning. And so be on the lookout for signs of burnout, including decreased satisfaction with work, signs of burnout, loss of motivation to do work, because burnout can lead to mental health issues like anxiety, stress. Even though we're counselors, we're not immune to it. It can lead to lapses in ethical judgment. If we're burnt out, if we're lackadaisical, if we have no motivation, maybe that leads to poor boundaries. Maybe that leads us to, feel too tired to call in that DHS referral, or maybe that leads us, too tired, or we miss cues to see that a client's really struggling, maybe feeling suicidal. And things to keep in mind is that you can burn out as a candidate. So things to do to prevent burnout: practice that professional self-care, consult on your difficult cases. So consult with your primary supervisor, consult with your on-site supervisor, consult with your colleagues, and maintain firm boundaries between work and home. We get into this field because we really want to help people. I mean, if you're getting into this field to make a lot of money to buy a yacht, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to, different career field, because we're probably not going to be making yacht money. But we want to help people. And so it's really tempting too. I'm sure right now in practicum, like, clients don't have your cell phone number. Clients can't get a hold of you after hours, but some agencies might recommend or even require that clients have a line to you. They might give you a work phone. They might make you use your actual phone. They might have an app where you're a lot more accessible to clients. And so it's really important to maintain those firm boundaries between work and home. Set hours where you don't respond to emails. Let your clients know when you are and you aren't available. Make sure they have emergency resources and you'll be available when they are having emergencies. But as much as you can, make sure you have a firm boundary between work and home, because the more that work spills over in the home, the more easy it is for you to burn out. You can also kind of reinvigorate yourself by, they'll say you're been in candidacy for about a year or so, kind of feeling burnt out. Try a new training, go to a CEU, try out a new treatment manual. And then also, if you can, take time from work, which I know is easier said than done. As a candidate, I know it's very difficult for me to take time away from work, because one, we're not paid that much. And two, like, we do want to help. And oftentimes we do have, right now, especially during the pandemic, a lot of agencies have bigger caseloads, bigger client load. And so there might be a lot of expectations on you, but whenever there's a lot of expectations on you, that's whenever it's important to take a step back and make sure that you're taking care of yourself before you're taking care of others. When preventing burnout too, what we might want to do is focus on that personal self-care, whether that is making sure we eat healthily, spend time with family, attending to medical needs, or getting your own therapist. For me, I'm a therapist and I have a therapist. Her name is Elizabeth. She's an awesome person, but she is someone who I meet with once or twice a month just to, process work stress. She holds me accountable in any goals that I have or any boundaries I want to set. And so for some, I know a lot of counselors have counselors, a lot of therapists have therapists. And so mine works well for me. And so if you find yourself getting burnt out or just want somebody to talk to, I mean, we're pretty cool. Therapists are awesome. So get you one if you can. So last, let's talk about getting that license. So let's say that we are getting close to our license. Either we are getting close to our 3,000 hours, or we're getting close to the last 2 years. You need to keep an eye on that, and so does your supervisor, because the board will not tell you when you are getting close to 3,000 hours. They will not alert you. They'll say that you've somehow clocked 3,500 hours. The board's not going to care. They're not going to tell you. They're not going to reach out and say, hey, you clocked a few extra hours here. You're good to apply. You have to watch out for that yourself. Whenever you have reached that final hours, or believe you're getting close, what you'll want to do is that last 6-month period where it's the hours that, okay, these are the hours that are going to get me to that 3,000 hours or get me to that 2 years. You'll write final hours on that log and also send an email to the board saying, hey, I just submitted my final hours. If you have passed the 3,000 hours, the board will tell you, and then they'll send you a licensing packet. So as you're getting close to your final hours, also watch for agency deadlines. Those are available on the Board of Behavioral Health website. And the agency deadlines will tell you by what day you need to have alerted the board and turned in your packet to be able to get licensed at the next board meeting. So usually this is about a month in advance. So I was set to be licensed in June of 2019. I had to get my licensing packet in to the board by the last week in April. And so keep an eye on the board's agency deadlines of when you need to have that packet turned in, because you'll fill out that packet, which basically says, I'm done with my candidacy. I'm ready for my licensure. Here's what I want it to say on my license. And you'll turn that into the board, as well as another $135 check to the board. So that's going to be at least 21 days, not hours before the board meeting. If you turn in your packet 21 hours before the board meeting, you're not getting licensed that day. I'm sorry. That's going to be 21 days before the board meeting. So even if you have reached that 3,000 hours, even if you turned in that board packet, you have to wait until you receive your license in order to practice as a licensed person. That means you have to keep going to supervision, you have to keep logging your hours, you have to keep pretending like you're a candidate until you receive your physical license. Because like again, I said, I had a friend who submitted her final hours, but she had that week where she only worked 17 hours. The board didn't count them. She had to remain under candidacy for 2 more months until she could get licensed. So make sure that you are staying under supervision until you get your license from the board. Licenses are only granted at the bi-monthly board meetings. So once you turn in your licensing packet, what you want to do is you turn your licensing packet to the board. You watch for the board meeting agenda. If you have turned in your packet at least 21 days in advance, your name should appear on the board meeting agenda, because at the next board meeting, what they're going to do is, here's a list of all the people who meet criteria for license. Do you approve, yay or nay? If your name is not on that list, you will not get your license. So make sure that you check the board meeting agenda as soon as it's out to make sure your name is on that agenda. That way you can be sure to get your license at the board meeting. Any questions on that? Because if the board makes a typo and leaves your name off, you're not going to get your license. So if for some reason you've turned in your license packet, you know you turned in everything on time, you should be on there, just send an email to the board and they should be able to correct it. So the board meeting, you may attend the board meeting, but you don't have to. I just anxiously awaited at a coffee shop for my approval email from the board saying I got my license. But some of my friends actually did approve the board meeting to watch themselves get their license. The board will upload your license and pocket cards to your applicant portal within a week. Now, if it's been more than 10 business days, if you were granted your license at the board meeting, it's been more than 10 business days and you still haven't got your license, make sure to send a polite email to the board, because in my case, they went to go send out our licenses and it wasn't me, but somebody had typed in my address wrong this was back whenever they actually mailed out paper licenses. They typed in the address wrong and my license was returned to the board and actually sat there for 2 weeks and they never called me and told me my license was returned due to the wrong address. So it wasn't until I called them 2 or 3 times that they said, oh yeah, your license has been sitting here. It was returned to the board for the wrong address. So make sure you check with the board if you haven't got your license. So once you receive your license, you are no longer considered a candidate. You don't have to turn in any of those hours logged between submitting your final hours and receiving your license. So once you submitted your final hours over that 3,000, that little weird grace period where you're waiting on your license, you don't have to turn those into the board. I recommend keeping those for a while just in case there's some sort of mix up. But your license and your pocket cards must be displayed anytime you're practicing. If you're doing home visits, you just need to carry your pocket cards. So this is my pocket card. That's what it looks like. It just says I have an active license, my license number, and all that jazz. So you have to make sure to display your license number wherever you are practicing and be able to give that to clients anytime they ask. Your initial license is valid for 2 years. Newly licensed therapists must accrue 40 hours of approved continuing education in a 2-year period. Whether you get that 40 hours within the first month of candidacy or the last month of candidacy, the board doesn't care. As long as within those first 2 years, you get 40 hours of continuing education. Though the general LPC renewal deadline is June 30th, and the LMFT renewal deadline is December 31st, your first license renewal may be different. if you get your first license in April, let's say you get your or let's do this. Let's say if you are licensed in April of 2024, your first license renewal will be April of 2026. You will still be expected to renew in June if you're an LPC, or December of 2026. You'll just have fewer hours to clock. So let's say that you renewed your license, your first license in April of 2026. You'll probably only have to clock like 6 or 7 continuing education hours for that 2 months before June. But you will have to keep in mind that your initial license may have a different deadline than the rest of your licenses. Any questions on your license and supervision, or I'm sorry, continuing education, anything like that? All right. So another shameless plug. If you guys want to stay up to date on continuing education opportunities or board meeting or legislation changes, I'm going to be publishing an article here in about, what time is it? In about 35 minutes or so on 5 laws or 5 bills that have been introduced in the Oklahoma legislature that might affect mental health providers. And so we have a whole bunch of articles, a whole bunch of continuing education resources, free and paid, just to help folks who are starting off practice, who want to learn new things as well as manage a practice. And so if you guys have any questions on that on our institute, feel free to let me know. I'm going to type in my email address into the chat. Edmond Counseling. There we go. There's my email address. If you guys have any questions, either about today's presentation or about further training or anything like that, feel free to reach out and let me know. I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to talk to people too. I love talking, as you can tell. But any questions for today? I'll just stare until
Intently stare at everyone.
I get teenagers to talk.
Comfortable. That's right.
Just kidding.
And certainly, I think for a lot of you all, this can seem a little bit overwhelming with all this information at once. And that's okay. And that's why here in a minute, I'm sending out Hayley's PowerPoints and the book that she put together, the ebook she put together, for you all to keep as a resource so that you've got that kind of guide along the way, which is also what your supervisor should be doing. But I think Hayley made a very good point of this. It's always on you to make sure you're doing the things you need to do. Don't expect other people to do that.
Yeah, like Dr. Lack said, it can seem very overwhelming. I think that the most overwhelming part for me as a candidate was just doing that whole application process, making sure I had my supervisor, my place of employment, my application in, my background check. Once you guys get that done, and that should only take about a week or so to put together, then it's a lot easier. I know it's a lot of moving parts, but like Dr. Lack says, check in with your supervisor, check in with the board as you need to as well. They've been more responsive, especially since they've got more staff. And so just make sure to check in, seek support from your supervisor, seek support from the board, seek support from each other too, because each of you are going to have different experiences, not only clinically, but in your practice or in dealing with the board. So reach out to each other as well. I talked about Amy and Jen Nguyen. I talk to Amy and Jen Nguyen nearly every day, probably at least once or twice a week. Amy and I call and consult about something. And so, make sure you're relying on each other as well, because along with your supervisors being a resource, each of you will be a resource to each other way into practice as well. I talked a lot.
No, you hate talking, Hayley. We all know it. We can tell. So we can tell. Hayley also likes to write. For those of you who don't know, she writes for the Lost Oval. Is how cool Hayley is. Very funny things. And then is on a pretty popular podcast, aren't you?
Pretty popular niche podcast, I guess.
More popular podcast than any of us are on. So about board gaming with her husband Delta. So
yeah, we review board games and beer. It's our podcast, Malt House Games. And you guys are going to be the first people outside of my boss and my husband who know this, but I'm actually going to be launching my own website here in the next few weeks on evidence-based board gaming and therapy. So how to facilitate evidence-based interventions using board games and not just play Connect 4 for 6 weeks and call it therapy, because that's not therapy. Turns out, fun fact.
That's not play therapy when you just play
That's-
with someone. That's not.
No, it's not.
Doesn't
And
work?
research suggests that, so as you guys know, like building rapport is important for establishing therapeutic relationship, but there's been preliminary research that's found that too much rapport building and too many sessions of that is actually harmful to the therapeutic relationship because people don't actually see it as therapy anymore. So I'll be launching that here pretty soon, which I'm really excited for, using evidence-based tactics, but using them with board games.
That's
I'm-
awesome. I can't wait to see that. Cannot wait to see that.
Thank you. Well, where are you guys practicing out of right now? What are some of your, you can type it in the chat or someone can unmute themselves. Where are you guys doing practicum?
I'm at OU Med at the Child Study Center, working with the problematic sexual behavior program.
Awesome. I've heard there's a lot of great training in that program. So that's a wonderful spot.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome.
I was just going to say that I'm there also. I'm just in the child trauma services program.
I just heard wonderful things about OU, and everyone who comes out of there has had a lot of great training, a lot of great skills. So you guys are in some great spots. I see Cornerstone and Rose State, more youth and family services. Awesome. Where else? Karen, where's Karen Wellness Center? I'm not familiar with that one. Sammy, where is that place?
It is on the west side of, do you know where Target is? Super Target on Second? Yeah, just on the west side, kind of in some, they look sort of like old townhouses.
Oh, okay. I know where that is.
Yeah.
By the ABC place there. Yeah. Awesome. So
That's one
UCO
of
can,
our new places for this year. So, and we'll be again for next year if somebody wants to go there. So.
awesome. Well, that's a great experience. I see UCO Counseling Edmond Family. Awesome. Lots of good places. No Deer Creek kids this year?
We haven't had anybody there in a couple of years, I don't think. So,
Really?
yeah, just haven't had anyone who wanted to work in that environment. So
That's fair. It's a lot of kids.
a lot of smelly children.
They're sticky. I don't know if you guys knew that about kids. Sometimes they're sticky.
They smell.
Yeah.
Especially the boys, because then they cover it up with their Axe spray.
Yes. It's just like a sea of Axe spray and Fortnite dances. So. Yeah. Well, do you guys have any questions on the candidacy process or counseling or anything like that? Even if it wasn't related to today's training, I'm more than happy to answer any questions I can. I know that the graduate school process is a really fun and rewarding process, but it's also a time whenever a lot of information is thrown at you, a lot of expectations are thrown at you really quickly. And so it's understandable at times to feel like this is a lot or it's overwhelming, but you guys are getting great training where you are, and it's really going to prepare you for going out into the field. I'm sure you guys already see it in your practicum. I know I'm biased because I'm a UCO person myself, but just going into practicum, going into the clinical setting outside of school, you definitely see that your training will pay off.
And I tell them stuff like that, but usually I have to get out there and see it. And they're like, oh, right. Actually, we do know what we're doing. So
Yeah, you guys get a lot of great training. Like, I've not known anyone else who's had like OCD training outside of UCO kids, like coming out of grad school, like being able to assess it and have a reversal training or exposure therapy. Like that's not something you see. Or having like actual orientations to follow, or how to build a treatment plan. You don't really see that a lot.
Well, so thank you, Hayley, so much for coming by and talking to everyone and helping inform them / make them even more slightly anxious, but assuage some of their anxiety at the same time by pointing out a path that's clear. So really, really appreciate that. Cannot wait to see the new website. So you better be letting us all know about that.
I will send it your way. I'm excited. Thank you for letting me come speak today, and thank you for letting me share this information. Guys, really, if you have questions, send me an email. I know I put it in the chat, but Dr. Lackey can send my email out if anyone needs it. But thank you guys for having me, and I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday and happy therapizing.
Thank you.